Welcome to another episode of Car Talks with Herbie whilst this car lies about how cold it is. -40, is it -40? Now, I wanted to discuss today about 4-stroke, 2-stroke, 2-stroke diesel, 2-stroke petrol. Now we're going to start with 2-stroke diesel, let's say. Let's pick that one. Now, how does a 2-stroke diesel work? For a starter, it differentiates from a 2-stroke petrol by not having any crankcase pressure. It doesn't rely on circulating hot air and fuel around the crankcase and then up through the side ports of the cylinder. Now, how it works is you have your piston, and the piston uncovers a port at the side. Now, air is pulled in, and because a diesel doesn't necessarily have the Venturi effect or scavenging effect of when the gases escape, pulling new gases in, more so with a 2-stroke petrol, the diesel has to rely on supercharging or some kind of induction for a 2-stroke diesel we're talking. Now, it's a supercharger usually, because if you were to use a turbocharger, there isn't enough exhaust gas pressure to spin it and create enough induction of air to pull the correct amount of volume of air and fuel in. And also, a diesel 2-stroke cannot be carbureted because they're compression ignition engines. No spark plugs. They rely on heat, compression of the piston and the air volume with a long stroke up the bore, and as soon as the fuel's injected, bang, explosion, we're gone. Now, it will already it will work with a poppet valve usually at the top with a 2-stroke diesel. Now, it works like a conventional valve, have rocker arm and things, and that allows the burnt fuel air mixture to escape. They use a supercharger because a centrifugal supercharger connects mechanically via a belt or chain or gear drive direct to the crank pulley or an eccentric like alternator style pulley. Now, there's also if you look at a 2-stroke diesel, there's also little holes called O-rings, they're like air holes, air rings, and it's the same sort of principle as uncovering the port, the piston acting as the valve, because you have to remember, both 2-stroke petrol and diesel do not have valves. It relies on the piston acting in a certain manner, covering the port and closing the port. Now, there is some weird 2-stroke diesels like opposing piston engines, which may not get into that because that gets quite complicated. And now, once those ports are closed, it creates a sealed chamber. The fuel source is injected, and boom, there we go. Now we're going to talk a little bit about knock as well, pre-ignition, because this is normal diesel. Diesels are usually built and based around heavier metals to cope with this, and they're built to take turbocharging. And this usually happens due to unburnt pockets of hydrocarbons around the different heat. There's different heat pockets and temperatures and little bits of carbons left over from a previous cycle of combustion, and when it's cold there's differences in heat and pressure. And because you have to remember, even with a petrol or a diesel, there's a slight delay in the combustion of the fuel, the whole volume of the cylinder, the combustion, and there's a flame front and then it expands, so there's a slight delay, and that's also why we advance the timing a little bit, so it goes off a little bit early to compensate with that delay as the RPMs rise. Now, a 2-stroke diesel compared to 4-stroke diesel, there's twice the amount of strokes, twice the amount of combustions happening per cycle, so they're quicker to rev as well. Now, diesel is also more energy dense. So what does that mean? It means it has more potential force, more potential for a larger explosion. And diesels get their compression from a long connecting rod. Diesels are usually under-squared. This in explanation, in basic terms, is a cylinder's diameter, right? The top, you measure it across round radius, right? Is smaller than the stroke, the length of the connecting rod connect to the crank shaft. Now, what does this mean? It means there's more torque, and more torque from a lower RPM. Okay, so this means that there's more, when the combustion happens, there's more potential energy and pressure pushing down on a narrower piston, let's say. So the same amount, if it's a wider piston, you'll have a lower compression, even if the stroke was the same. And I can tell you why. Because that same amount of fuel energy is densified within a smaller space, leading to more of a pinpoint explosion. And this explosion, sorry, I'm just gonna deal with this slow driver. There we go. Oh, BM. And this densified explosion pushes down on the cylinder, and there is more time and duration of force applied to the crankshaft. And now that means there's more time, more force pushing down on the crankshaft, rotating it for a longer amount of time, thus creating more mechanical kinetic energy and force and rotational force. And also, because the way diesels work, there's pressure being built up to the top as well, increased amount of pressure compared to petrol. Now, there is disadvantage. Obviously, you can't rev a diesel as much because the amount of time it takes per cycle is going to be longer, because there's more distance the piston has to travel as well. Fun fact for the day: did you know that diesel pistons, trunk pistons, contain sometimes little oil ports under the piston's not the crown, but the piston skirt, and that helps cool it down? Because you have to remember one thing, another fact: diesels like to run lean. They like heat because they're compression ignition, compression of air, and air being densified, and the air gets hotter and hotter, usually through glow plug, when a glow plug is introduced within that, and then it has to rely on high pressure fuel. Bang, instant explosion. Because if there isn't enough pressure or heat, the fuel, when it's injected, because there's no spark, won't go off. So it has to be very hot, and that's why they've got very long stroke as well. But we do have indirect diesels. Early diesels were indirect diesel injection before high pressure fuel pump injection. These are actually able to run on vegetable oils and crappy chip oils and stuff like that, due to the being a lower pressure and there being what's called a pre-chamber. Pre-chamber is built into the cylinder head. It's like a little spherically type shaped chamber with a glow plug in there. You could say it's like someone lighting a candle and leaving it on in there, and the fuel injector next to it, and air volume coming through to it before the valve for the intake, and it has what's called a throat. and this leaks into the cylinder, filling it with atomized fuel and air mixture as well. Also, when the combustion happens with an indirect diesel engine, the throat there's a reverse. There is a reverse of air and fuel mixture going back into the pre-chamber, leading to better atomization and better mixture overall. Now, there are advantages to this and disadvantages. Obviously, lower grade fuels can be used. Taking the time today. There we go, get her up to speed. And yeah, let's briefly go on to two-stroke petrols. Now, two-stroke petrols, the same action with the piston. It uncovers a port, and because the exhaust port's open as well, the exhausting effect of the previous cycle does what's called scavenging. It pulls away, it's like someone going, give it here, pulls away the burnt air and fuel and mixture and draws in like a draft the mixture, the air volume, and usually fuel mixture, and then this gets drawn into the combustion chamber. And also methods as well, it goes under the crankcase and up through a side port valve, mixes, bang, compression. Now there's fuel oil mixed in there, that's called so it used to be called gas oil or pet oil or something of that manner, and there needs to be oil in there because the oil crystals and particles need to contact the metal in the engine to keep it cool enough and lubricated enough, or else it will seize. And also, the reason why there's a use of expansion tanks to tune a two-stroke petrol is because the two-stroke petrol it relies on resonance. Resonance is the combustion. Each combustion creates a frequency and a pulse. So a pulse is an expansion, a contraction, across the exhaust part, the exhausting part of the combustion cycle. Now, with different shapes, different metals, this can be called pinging as well, or the power band. And this resonance can act and ping backwards and help draw more air in as the cycle continues, as these ports are uncovered. And you can have certain shapes, diameters, twists to help create these pulses, which these pulses help draw things out. Because a pulse is like this, it's like a star emitting. Pulse, close, or it could be like a recorder, pulse, close. That's how it exits, and you can tune that in a certain way for a two-stroke advantage. Now, there's a slight issue tonight because it's late. Right, kind of sounds whatever, a bit over dramatic, but I have to get a few things out of the way tonight. So maybe tomorrow or day after, or if I've got more time, we'll go into more depth and more precision with the conversation about this two-stroke versus four-stroke versus diesel two-stroke, why they don't exist anymore, and why two-stroke petrols don't exist anymore, and we can go into more science. So thank you very much again if you've bothered to watch the whole video, and I shall see you very soon. Good night.